When I woke up, very confused, she said, "You almost died last night. In fact, no one can believe you were alive."
I went into the games not knowing what was coming.
As humans, we just hate uncertainty.
You just sensed that it was out there.
You have to start somewhere.
We're all programmed to push ourselves even farther.
This is On the X, an IRONCLAD original. Hey everybody, this is Chris Irwin, and welcome to On the X. Today my guest is Dr. Leah Lagos. Dr. Lagos is a licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in health and performance psychology, known for her pioneering work in heart rate variability, or HRV. Her expertise includes strategies to reduce anxiety, boost resilience to adversity, and enhance health. She's worked with and assessed numerous NBA and NFL players, as well as multiple college athletes, and she's the author of Heart Breath Mind: Conquer Stress, Build Resilience, and Perform at Your Peak. After reading her book, I was so excited to have this conversation, and it didn't disappoint. We really dive into what it takes to improve your HRV through resonance breathing and her 10-week process to make that happen. I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with her, and no matter who you are, there's tons of actionable stuff in here for you to implement in your own life. You can learn more about Dr. Lagos by going to drleahlagos.com. Let's just start with a little bit of background on you. You are a clinical psychologist by trade, if I'm getting that right. So can you just talk a little bit about what that means for anybody, for kind of lay people out there that don't understand that, and what got you interested into it? Like if it was just something you always wanted to do, if there was a personal experience you had when you were younger that made you want to go into that field, what drew you to it?
So the one thing in life, Chris, I've known since I was about 5 years old is that I wanted to help others and to help them be healthier, to help them pursue their dreams. And I didn't know exactly what the title was. So in the next decade, I merged my passion, which was at the time sports. As a young adolescent female who was also tall, it was a window for me to feel comfortable in my body, to develop confidence, to develop relationships that persist to this day. And I saw it as a vehicle for others to become more authentic and in themselves.
Yeah.
And so I went around at 16 and 17 saying I was going to be a sports psychologist. And at the time, people said, "Well, that's not really a thing yet." and I said, "Don't worry, it will be a thing." And as luck would have it, in college, I pursued different internships at the USOC, the United States Olympics Committee. I lived out in Colorado Springs for 3 months as an intern, the PGA Tour, and the NBA. And so fostering just my understanding of athletes and performance and what it meant to be elite in your field. And it was my fascination and my love, and was an extension of also wanting to help people. So the way to do that, for me, to give it the broadest reach, was to go ahead and obtain my doctorate in clinical psychology with a specialization in sports psychology. And I did just that at Rutgers, and then I specialized in working with their different teams and their sports medicine department. And that would begin the next 20 years of my life.
Okay. What sport did you play when you were growing up, or sports?
So I ran. I was a runner.
Okay.
And also high jump in track and field.
Got it.
Then at the University of Florida, I was recruited for rowing. And
I was a rower too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And where did you row, Chris?
Naval Academy. So I was a lightweight rower. You said you were tall. How tall are you?
I'm 6 feet.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Certainly for a woman that is tall. So you're a lot taller than me. I'm like 5'8". So I was on the lightweight team. And I still am faced with this every day, or any day, I should say, in the gym where there's a rowing workout, and the guys that are like 6'3", 6'4", despite, I like to think they have pretty good technique after rowing in college for 3 years, but I still can't. There's just no way I'm going to pull hard on those guys. There's just too much leverage on there.
But there's so many pieces, Chris. I'd be very curious about, during your time as a rower, getting up at 4 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, 100%.
Water and rowing in unison. That idea of resonance, which we'll talk later about.
Yeah.
with HRV and heart rate variability, but experiencing that in your body with others on the water and doing that day in and day out.
Yeah. I had a love-hate relationship with rowing. So I was a little bit, I mean, you'd probably think this, but a little bit of a glutton for punishment when it came to sports. Well, I was a soccer player primarily, but I didn't make the team in college. So I had to figure out something else I was going to do. And that's when I'm like, well, as a plebe at the Naval Academy, it was like I got cut from the soccer team, which had been my life as an athlete. I was also a wrestler in high school, but that wasn't really going places in college. And so I sat there for a second and thought, like, what can I do? I have to be an athlete. Like, I just don't know what I am without being an athlete. So I sat there thinking, what can I do that requires very little skill? And I was like, I'm sure I could be a rower. I can pull an oar. Like, how, there's got to be that's an easy learning curve. So I literally, like, that day ran over to the boathouse, like in the pouring rain, and just showed up and was like, how do I become a rower? Right. And I tell people, like, and I think, you talk about sort of sports psychology, that sport, I mean, all sports have their own mental aspects to them, right? And challenges, but rowing and wrestling is as well, just the amount of, like, how hard it can be and how much you have to kind of grind on those things, I think. And rowing, especially when we get back to the love-hate thing. Yes, like, up early in the morning, sun coming up, when the water's glass and the boat sings, right? So if you get the boat going the right speed, it hums, like it makes a sound. And that's an amazing feeling, but it's also so repetitive and it's so mentally taxing to go out and do that hour after hour after hour, especially in harsh conditions too. And the Severn River in Annapolis, not glass all that often. So, but that's cool. So how far did you go with that, with those sports?
So I was recruited by Cornell, by their head coach.
That's where my parents went. My parents are Cornell.
Really?
Yeah, Cornell grads.
And their coach wanted to train me for the Olympics.
Yeah.
And it was a really big crossroads, and it was something that felt inspiring and I was passionate about, but also the pragmatic piece was there was no long-term future. And so you do the Olympics and that's your focus. And I didn't have a career objective after that.
Yeah.
So I thought about it a lot, and I continued rowing competitively, but I didn't make the leap. And then I dove more into the academic side for the last half of my time at University of Florida.
Do you still do those things? Do you still run and row and like?
Yeah. And you know what else? And I still am in touch with, and I just talked to last night, the person who was the head captain of the men's team, and he's married with 4 kids and an orthopedic surgeon. One of my best friends was in the 4th seat of my of my boat. And there's something about training with people and overcoming adversity together that binds you physiologically in a way I'm so grateful for. And the concept of physiological connection, I think, is something that we all experience in different ways, but is also a piece within elite performance, whether it's leading a group or being able to perceive others and connect to others in a team environment that is real and people don't talk about as much. But there's a way that our physiologies connect without even just words.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we'll get into some of that with your book. A couple other questions kind of on this piece. You talked about sort of sports psychology not being a thing when you were growing up. And certainly that was my experience too. I can't remember, even in college, I don't think we ever did anything that was really touching on sort of mental preparation, maybe a little bit of visualization, but that's probably about it. So when did that become a thing? Did it sort of explode all at once? When did that sort of come into fashion? I don't even know.
Well, it began emerging. So I graduated high school in 1997. And it was at least a term that was being used. There were sports psychologists for the NBA. There was Tara Scanlon at UCLA, um, who I worked with a little bit, Jim Bauman at the USOC. So it was starting to become a thing around 2000. But I would say it didn't become something that was really covered in the media until 10 years later. And now we see sports psychologists at the Olympics. We see them even at the collegiate level, which I love. But it's interesting, isn't it, that there was a time when it wasn't a thing and it was a hope. But as mental health and just the concept of elite performance has gone from something that is nebulous in nature or only mental to something that's mind, body, and can be quantified through data.
Right.
I think that's really transformed and elevated the field of sport and performance psychology.
Yeah. And was there a single event that kind of made that evolution happen? Was it just more of an awareness of sort of the need for that kind of thing? Like, where did that demand signal come from? Was it the athletes that were sort of saying, hey, this would be helpful? Were coaches just kind of becoming smarter and saying, we probably want to focus on this a little more?
I think both merger, but I also think data has become
right.
key,
Okay. Yep.
Transforming it from something that was qualitative to something that's quantitative. I think data is a really big piece of behavioral change.
Yeah.
And when you provide data, it accelerates behavioral change. People can latch on to something, they can see it, they feel they have control over it. And I think that was one of the catalysts for sport and performance psychology becoming more everyday mainstream.
Yeah. Hey, on the rowing piece, by the way, have you read The Boys in the Boat? Have you read that book?
I have not.
It's a great book. It's really good. It's about, it's been years since I've read it. George Clooney turned it into a movie, but it's about this Olympic rowing team. Oh gosh, and I'm gonna botch when it was, but it was early 20th century sometime, right? I don't know if it was World War II. I can't remember exactly, but it's just it's a story about all this kind of stuff, like teamwork and these guys working together and this eccentric coach and all of that. But I think you'd appreciate it as a rower. It's just something to look into. Just real quick on a point of clarification. What's the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist? I don't even know.
Psychiatrist can prescribe medication.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so let's kind of get into your work here, because you have, from my perception, carved out this really cool niche focused around heart rate variability and what you call resonance breathing. And this idea of basically training your physiology to better react to stress, stressful situations, which again, I love from my kind of own personal experience of like experimenting with these things. So let's start with heart rate variability, because this is a concept that I think a lot of people know, but maybe don't understand exactly what it is or the benefit. So can you just touch on how heart rate variability works, what it means, and why it's important?
Sure. So heart rate variability, there are two different ways to measure it. And what it encapsulates, Chris, is the body's resilience and the ability to let go of stress, to manage stress at a baseline autonomic level. And even before we think about stress, our body's gearing up to either protect us or help us in some other way. And without control over how our body responds in these moments, we aren't actually in control as much as we think we are of our thoughts and behaviors. So heart rate variability becomes an index of the body's ability to manage stress under specific moments. It also is an index of just health and longevity in and of itself. Just generally, we want larger heart rate variability, and people will say, well, what is the ideal rate for me? I'm XYZ years old and this amount tall. And that's kind of too simple. What we've grown into as experts in the field is understanding that everyone has a range. So Chris, your range may be 28 to 48. And we want
28 to 48. What's that a metric of? What are we measuring?
28 to 48 beats per minute.
Beats per minute,
And so what we're looking at um, are the seconds in between spikes in heart rate. It's called RR intervals.
Right.
And we want larger. Larger is better. And when you don't have as large of numbers, they're less. It shows that your autonomic nervous system is compromised. It's under stress. Maybe there's illness. I've just had people that have an inability to let go, that are peak performers in their field, but despite being a professional athlete in a specific sport, their HRV is low. And then we begin to look at the context as to why. And sometimes it can be trauma, and the body's still in this fight or flight state and it never lets go. Sometimes it has to do with substances, too much caffeine use. I once had someone come to me that was self-medicating for ADHD with 15 cups of coffee a day. Well,
I know a lot of people that they're probably close to that. I don't know about self-medicating, but just through kind of habit, right? Yeah.
And some coffee doesn't have so much of an impact on HRV for most people, but there is a certain amount that does. But understanding what's causing the low HRV and then helping them get into kind of the upper quartile of their range more consistently. And I call that performing at their elite self. Everyone has a bandwidth. You can define it quantitatively. And certainly we want to maximize baseline HRV in general, but we also want to have you consistently at kind of that top quartile of your HRV range so that you're consistently able to operate from your maximum autonomic bandwidth. And it's the difference between operating from a place of scarcity in the world versus abundance. And I call it physiological abundance. It's how you feel when you're next to someone you love on the beach in the sand with no worries. Your mind is free. Your body is open and at a high level of agility to relax or respond. And there just isn't an intrinsic pressure that can compromise the nervous system.
So just so I'm 100% clear on the kind of the concept here, let's say my resting heart rate is, just for ease of math, is 60 beats a minute, right? 1 beat a second on average. We're talking about resting heart rate, right? Because obviously I could make my heart rate go up and down if I all of a sudden stood up and jumped up and down, and that's what we're talking about. So at rest, what we're looking for is, some beats are 1.1 seconds apart, some beats are 0.9 seconds apart, right? So basically my actual heart rate is, even at rest, is going from, call it 65 beats a minute to 55 beats a minute. And that gap, we want to be as big as possible. I assume there's got to be a limiting thing here where you don't want 1 beat in 30 seconds and then 59 in the next 30 seconds, right? There has to be a limit to that, obviously, right?
Yes, but for most people, this would get too technical. So I'm going to give you a different way.
Okay.
And it's a very visual way for people that are tracking HRV and looking at their HRV, their oscillations on the inhale and exhale using different types of wearables.
And just real quick, and typically our heart rate goes up when we inhale and goes down when we exhale, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And resonant sinus arrhythmia.
Okay.
And we want these oscillations, the inhale when the heart rate goes up and the exhale when the heart rate goes down, to be as big as possible. I call it, ideally, you have an ocean-like wave, but many people just at a baseline state don't. They don't have a lot of oscillation. So I call it peak to trough. And it's another way of looking at heart rate variability that's more visual and just looking at the variation on the inhale to exhale. So Chris, maybe you're 50 to 65, okay, as you from your baseline heart rate to the max heart rate when you inhale and returning back to baseline. Okay, at 15 peak to trough is perfectly normal and fine, but there are some people who have much less. And then I'll try and work with them to understand the contextual factors as to why.
Yep.
But the HRV training that I specialize in is to maximize that oscillation. So let's say your baseline heart rate variability peak to trough this is different than the RR interval, but it's just much easier for users at home. And I mentioned it a little bit in my book, but it's just an easier, user-friendly way for people who aren't as familiar with HRV to look at the changes they're making. And then through training, you can maximize those oscillations. And why is that important? These oscillations are an index of your body's ability to respond effectively under pressure without conscious input.
Right. So, and do we know why? Like, understand that there's a correlation. We can basically say you have a more resilient nervous system if you have a higher HRV. But do we know exactly why, or is it just something that we go, okay, there's a correlation. We don't understand exactly why, but it's something we can obviously affect.
Well, the origin of HRV was actually using this with unborn fetuses to predict healthy births. And so doctors found a high correlation between unborn babies having certain thresholds of HRV and being able to have healthy births. And so that was the beginning of heart rate variability. Then through time, doctors, particularly in the medical world, used HRV as a predictor of heart health. So low HRV was predictive of cardiovascular issues, heart failure. And then people like myself began to ask questions, well, how can this help people who aren't afflicted or in health emergencies, people who are just looking to optimize? Can it help that?
Right. Yep. Yeah. Love it. Preventative stuff. Like, what a concept, right? Let's not wait till there's a disaster. Let's maybe get ahead of this.
And what's so cool is that within the world of optimizing health and performance, there are so many different functions, Chris. Someone will come to me and say, I want to improve my putting on the golf course, because HRV is directly, that heart rate deceleration on the exhale is directly related to fine motor skill. And it has a beautiful correlation with improving putting.
Sure.
But what they find is their sleep improves. They are having less arguments with people that are close to them. They're able to let go of stress more easily, and they're having greater moments of focus and energy on the golf course. So there are all sorts of directions that heart rate variability innervates, because it's putting someone at their full bandwidth. So you take someone like yourself, many gifts and talents in the world, but you want to harness that as much as possible, right?
Sure.
You have this beautiful podcast, you lend insights to the world, but how do you do that day in and day out and capture and know if you're not at your best self? And HRV is a really dynamic, quantitative way to say, something's happening. My HRV is dipped today. What can I do? And what can I do tonight and even in the moment to recalibrate to get here?
Yep. On the X is proudly presented by Mechanics Wear, the gloves trusted by pros. Originally designed by a legendary race mechanic, Mechanics Wear has become the top choice for anyone who needs tough, reliable protection. From construction sites to the front lines, these gloves offer unbeatable comfort, durability, and grip. Stay cool, dry, and in control with Mechanics Wear. Gear up for whatever comes your way. And just speaking personally, Mechanics gloves were the go-to glove for us in the military, certainly. And they're still my go-to glove when it comes to just working around the house. A glove that I've worn for decades at this point, and it's still kind of my go-to glove. Mechanics Wear gloves are available at most retailers, as well as on mechanics.com and on GSA Advantage. Mechanics Wear is also proud to offer an exclusive 15% off discount through the ID.me program to military, veterans, and first responders. Click on the ID.me button in your shopping cart and follow the steps to verify your eligibility. Real quick point of clarification there too, just when we talk about autonomic nervous system for people that don't understand. So essentially things that happen automatically, right? Autonomic is sort of automatic. Two branches there, sympathetic, parasympathetic branches of the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic is typically what we think of as sort of fight or flight, that's ramping up. Parasympathetic is rest and digest. I always think of...
That's true. That is true. But in the world of peak performance, it's open and agile. So I want to make sure that people understand that being in a parasympathetic state isn't just for rest.
Yeah.
It is a state actually of openness and agility.
Okay. I like it. Yeah. Great. But I think the point there is most people are sympathetic dominant, right? We have to work on getting ourselves more parasympathetic. And I always think of those words sometimes get confusing. You would think like sympathy is like heart opening, and like I think of it that way. So I have to think of, to me, parasympathetic is like a parachute, like sort of slow down and kind of open up. But I really love that idea of opening. So what got you into this? Where did you, like along your journey, did you go, heart rate variability, that's the key?
You know, it happened in grad school, and I heard a talk by Paul Lear, who teaches at UMD&J and studied heart rate variability. And he and the Vashilos, Evgeny and Bronya Vashilo, discovered something called resonance. And they were Russian scientists, and he brought them from Russia because he thought it was so profound. And they had been using heart rate variability and resonant frequency training to help ameliorate clinical symptoms such as PTSD, anxiety, and even depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so moved by their stories and the sense of control this gave their patient over conditions that otherwise they felt they had no control over, when medicine wasn't working for depression, or PTSD had persisted for months beyond a specific incident. And so I went and asked them, has this ever been used with athletes? Because a large portion of the clients I was seeing wanted to find ways to manage anxiety in a specific period of time. And with talk therapy, and it certainly had its benefits, but I couldn't prescribe a specific period of time upon which they would have XYZ symptom amelioration and tangible data.
Yeah.
This did that. And so Paul Lear looked at me and he said, well, that's an interesting concept, and we should explore it. And little did I know that would lead to my graduate thesis and the next 25 years of my work.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And the way it happened was I worked with the Rutgers golf team, and it was supposed to be for 10 weeks just to go through the HRV training. And we persisted far beyond that, because what we found was that above and beyond the performance benefits of heart rate variability in helping them essentially gain control over their physiological state that allowed for their innate skill set to manifest more consistently, there were many health benefits. And there were also things that we could identify about how they were living their life when we saw variations, like the dips in HRV on certain days.
Yeah.
And then after that, I went and did a postdoc at University of Miami. I worked with their athletic department as well as their sports medicine team. And then I went and worked on the PGA Tour for 2 years, traveling with a few different players and their families, and then opened my office in New York City.
Okay, so we've got heart rate variability, which we want to be better at. So how do we get a baseline on that? How do we measure it so that we know what we're dealing with?
So there are two ways. And one is to find a clinician who's board certified in biofeedback and going into their office. And I highly recommend working with a clinician. It's a different experience than doing it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
But for people that don't have access to clinicians nearby, you can start the process by using either a wearable or even just a breath pacer. And then I outline a process in my book, Heart, Breath, Mind, and describe the process for using a pacer or a wearable to define your resonant frequency. But everyone has a frequency, Chris, at which maximizes those heart rate oscillations. What's really interesting is 90% of the time it matches with the frequency. If you ask the person, out of these 4 breathing ratios, which felt the least effortful and the most enjoyable? Mm-hmm. So you don't always have to have the wearable. You can go with what feels the best to you most of the time.
So
And
real quick,
really-
when you use the term biofeedback there, is that just measuring biological data? Is this getting more in depth than that? Or is that basically when we talk about biofeedback, is that what we're talking about?
So the broad term of biofeedback is measuring physiological data and feeding it back in real time so that you can make behavioral decisions. Think about when you are tracking your weight and you step on a scale and you go, that wasn't the number I was expecting, or maybe it was, but you make decisions then based sometimes on the numbers that you see.
Yep.
Post that. And it's similar in nature of giving feedback about your heart rhythms or your respiration rates. Some people look at body temperature.
Yep.
For heart rate variability biofeedback, we're looking specifically at heart rate variability, and respiration rate. And the way to do that properly is with a clinician who can monitor you with scientific grade equipment. If you don't have access to that, there's different wearables that will help you look at heart rate variability in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Elite HRV used to have Core Sense that helped track HRV, and now there are some different apps out that HRV for training is one of them, where you can measure your heart rate and heart rate variability in real time. Just they advise, and I advise as well, in the morning as soon as you wake up, and just sitting in a similar position, feet flat on the floor, and breathing normally while tracking. They have a little sensor with your finger.
And is there a number that we're trying to hit with that? Like, is HRV of whatever it is? Is that what we're trying to do? Like you said, I think it probably varies in an individual, but is there a range there, or what's the kind of?
It depends on age and height.
Okay.
So as opposed to on your own trying to reach for some abstract number that may or may not be right for you, I'd recommend starting with trying to get a sense of what your range is over a 2-week period, and then what the number would be that would put you in the top quartile of that range.
Okay.
And use that as your goal.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, there's lots of different wearables and sensor types, and it just becomes what feels right to you. What's kind of cool is to have a sense day in, day out. There are different types of wearables. Aura Ring has fairly good. It's HRV tracking for nocturnal HRV. 8 Sleep also does. There are a few others.
Okay.
And tracking kind of what your number is for a 2-week period to get a sense of that range, and then you can calculate the top quartile.
Okay, got it. All right, so we've got the data now. So now we have to do the work, right? And I think, again, what I loved about your book, I mean, I loved a lot of things about it, but just this premise of it's training. It's not like, obviously people come and see you and can work with you and get kind of like the high end attention, right? But someone can read your book and do all this on their own, which I love. I love this kind of empowerment idea of like, you're not helpless. This is something you can train yourself to, but you have to put the time in. And it's largely breath work, this resonance breathing, and kind of goes through that. So talk about that. Talk about the basis of it, how it works, why the sort of resonance breathing pattern, the ratio is important there, and sort of how the basic structure of and it's a 10-week program, I should say. It's kind of, so
it is. And I have studied and tried. I mean, I've had people call me from India to say, can I just come to you for 10 days straight? You for 10 days and teach me everything. And I want to learn everything and go back, an HRV expert. And you don't develop the skills in that amount of time. And I've tried to slice and dice it to see, well, what happens if you double up? What if you triple up? I mean, we've run tons of experiments. It works. 15 minutes twice a day for 10 weeks. You will have a reflex that kicks in on its own to rebalance you during moments of stress, and more agility over your desire to amp up or let go. You're in control.
Yeah.
And I love that. But you have to do this. And I say this to anyone who embarks on the process. It is life-changing. I'm not here just to maximize your HRV. I'm here to change your life.
Right.
And
Yeah.
there's
Well,
so many different vectors, but you have to do the 15 minutes twice a day for 10 weeks.
well, it's just like any other skill or getting in shape or any of those things. Look, I talk about this stuff all the time, like personally, and I espouse this concept of sort of training, whether it's mental training, breathwork training, whatever it may be. Like, it's just like if you came in and said, I'm 200 pounds overweight and can you help me lose 200 pounds in 10 days? It'd be like, no, we can't do it. Like, I can teach you the concepts so you understand them, but it's not going to happen that fast. Or like, hey, I want to learn piano. I've never played piano before. Can you teach me in 10 days? No. Like, again, you can understand how, but it's a skill. You got to put the time in that, so your body slowly kind of adapts to it, right? And builds up these patterns.
And the heart is a muscle, and we can train it like any other muscle in the body with consistency and frequency to teach it how we want it to behave under demand.
Yeah.
On demand and under pressure.
Well, and what I love about that too is breath work to me is so interesting because it's the one thing that is sort of, at least I think, it's the one thing that's automatic. Like, we're going to breathe no matter what, right? Without thinking about it, I'm breathing. But it is sort of the keyboard or gateway into altering other autonomic patterns in my body, because it happens automatically, but I can make a conscious effort to do it differently. Where it's like, I don't think, maybe there's somebody who's like super enlightened who can do this out there, but I can't like directly change my heartbeat. I can't sort of like say, heart, slow down, heart, speed up. But what I can do is I can breathe differently and therefore have a indirect impact on that. And I think that's why working on your breathing can be so important, because it has all these downstream effects that you kind of can't work on in any other way. So talk about, by the way, I'd never heard of this pattern, like resonance breathing. And I've done a lot of different breath work, right? Like I've done, in fact, I do some videos on it, like where I do a perfect breathing video. And I'd love to get your take on that, sort of James Nestor's thing. And Wim Hof and, 4-7-8 and box breathing, right? And I've tried all these things. I'd never heard of resonance breathing. I'm after reading your stuff, like I'm an enormous believer in it. So talk about what that is and why it matters, like why the ratio matters, and kind of, and how you figure it out too, right? So you kind of talk about most people, it's what, 6 breaths, total breaths a minute, right? So it's every 10 seconds, it's a 4-second inhale, 6-second exhale, but not exactly. And there's ways to sort of dial that in, right? With sort of apps and stuff like that. So yeah, get into that. It's awesome.
Okay. So what the Bashilas and Paul Rutgers found is that everyone has a rate of breathing that maximizes the heart rate oscillations that we were just talking about. The oscillations that reflect our resilience, our agility in responding to stress at a baseline level, even before it hits conscious thought. And to gain more control, think of this as a master command ship. And you want to be really precise and agile. And every time you're breathing it at this particular rate, it strengthens the master ship. It makes it stronger. It makes it more sensitive, more intuitive, more precise. And so this is not a process just to relax you or to change your state in the moment. It's a process to gain control over and strengthen what's called the baroreflex. And the baroreflex controls heart rate and blood pressure. And we want the baroreflex to gain strength. So breathing at the particular frequency, and I'll talk to you in a minute about what those can be and how to identify it, strengthens the baroreflex. And after 4 consecutive weeks, the 15 minutes twice a day, breathing at your resonant frequency, we find that we can actually quantify a measurable strengthening of the baroreflex. Interestingly, it's the 4th week where people come in and they say, Doc, the same stressors don't bother me to the same level. So, maybe it's sitting in traffic, and for some people that's a 9 out of 10 stressor. And the stress doesn't disappear completely, but it's a 6. And they're noticing that more and more in their lives. And that is just the start. But what's amazing is that by strengthening the baroreflex, the person who wasn't in control of their response to stress now is.
Yep.
From a process perspective, so why is this breathing different than the others? Because it's targeted at maximizing what's called 0.1 hertz in heart rate. And so we can measure the frequencies, the dominant frequencies in the heart rate. And what the Vashilos and Paulier found is that 0.1 hertz is associated with what's called resonance throughout the system, where there's activity all along the vagus nerve, from the head, the brain, all the way down to the gut. So breathing at resonance is innervating all of these systems at once. Think of it as a super information highway. And we want that highway to be as precise and effective as possible. So I say to my clients many times, you all are coming in and maybe you're a Volvo in terms of the super information highway right now. You're able to get what you need done in life. But I want you to be a Maserati. I want you to have that precision and agility to speed up when you need to speed up or amp up, or to let go and subtract in times that benefit you. And so with 10 weeks of training, it's really fascinating, but you can shift your physiology in time through this process and gain control over even being able to shift your heart rhythms from a sympathetic, that fight or flight state, to a parasympathetic. And what that allows you to do, and we can talk about it in time, is change how you think. You go from a myopic state to one where you can think textually. You can take yourself out of a charged situation mentally and see things from different angles. It's really, really fascinating. And there are reasons for that. This engenders greater blood flow and oxygen all over the body, including the prefrontal lobe. This is not a process that is the same as box breathing. It has different outcomes. And Wim Hof produces some beautiful outcomes that are different than this. And I believe that each of these breathings elicits a different frequency in the heart rate. But this particular frequency, resonant frequency, is an important one. It has health benefits, reducing anxiety, improving mood, enhancing focus. It also can be very helpful for letting go of trauma. And for peak performers, it's fabulous for being able to gain control over your body's reactivity during critical moments. So Olympians, PGA Tour players, NBA players being able to perform at that full bandwidth of ability on demand and at critical times.
There's a couple of apps, right, that help us sort of dial this in for ourselves. How do those, I don't know which ones they are. I know they're in your book, but how does that work, right? Because we're talking about like fractions of seconds here where we're trying to get the exact rate. Are we watching something on a screen to kind of try and figure this out? Because the beginning part of this is the first week or so is figuring this out for yourself. Like, okay, I'm going to start at this sort of 4-second inhale, 6-second exhale cadence, but then I've got to experiment a little bit left or right to figure out what my actual resonant breathing rate is, right? And so is that how it works? Am I like watching a dot flash or something? What am I doing?
You're watching a pacer, and there are several different pacers, and you can set them at different rates. One of the pacers, and it's free. I have no affiliation to it, but it's just an easy download. It's a circle that goes from small to large, and you can set it at different precise rates, 4.2 and 6.3, and the different ratios that I recommend in my book. If you don't have, for instance, access even to a pacer on your cell phone, you can just do 4 in, 6 out. It's not quite as precise as going through the very different ratios, but it still leads to many, many gains.
Yeah.
So that is an alternative.
And so we're doing this ideally twice a day, probably morning and evening. Like, is it first thing when you wake up and then right before you go to bed? Is that kind of the ideal timing?
A good pace. Some people prefer to do it around lunchtime,
Oh, okay.
because they find it to energize them. After week 4, this can improve energy.
Mhm.
There's cardiovascular efficiency savings happening because at baseline, if you've done this, your respiration and your heart rate begin to sync, meaning they coincide, as opposed to the rate of breathing and the rate at which your heart beats are different.
Yep.
And when they coincide, that's less energetic output for your entire nervous system. And so
Yeah.
people feel oftentimes after breathing for 15 to 20 minutes that they have an elevation in energy. That happens again after week 4.
Okay.
So with that said, some people prefer to do as soon as they wake up and lunchtime. It just depends on the person.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit just about mechanics here?
Sure.
Because I think your technique, it's you're inhaling through your nose and exhaling kind of through your mouth, right?
Correct.
And is there a reason why exhaling through your mouth is important? Because I know for me, a lot of the techniques I've done that are sort of in this vein, whether it's perfect breathing or something else, I really like to, or like alternate nostril breathing, for example, is all through your nose. And I find that very relaxing. And certainly normally walking around, I don't breathe in through my nose and out through my mouth. That's not like sort of a normal. So why is a sort of mouth breathing on the exhale good for this technique? What does that lend to it?
It's easier to reduce the carbon dioxide levels in the body.
Okay.
And what I found is on rare occasions, nostril breathing, very rare occasions, will outdo the open mouth on the exhale breathing in terms of producing higher HRV, but most of the time it does not. If someone feels ardently that nostril breathing helps them, then you go, I trust your body.
Yeah.
But I've only seen that in a few cases. And for the most part, the inhale through the nose and the exhale through the mouth leads to the highest gains in maximizing HRV. And the energetic piece that I mentioned to you that happens after week 4, I think it also has to do with the oxygen levels in the blood.
Okay.
That at baseline are increased from this breathing process.
Okay. The other mechanics part is sort of belly breathing, right? Like not, and so I really want to understand this because I understand the idea of your diaphragm moving, right? This muscle that's kind of in your upper abdomen, and that being, I talked to another guy separately from this, but Andy Sabatier, sort of a breathing expert. And he talked about it like sort of like a bellows, like a blacksmith bellows, where the diaphragm's sort of like pulling that cavity open to allow your lungs to expand. But there's also like a part of me that says, okay, but my lungs are in my chest, right? So my chest has to move, and they're not in my stomach, so to speak, right? Like there's other organs that are down there. So is that, I don't know, there's a part of me that feels like the term belly breathing is a little bit of a misnomer because it makes me feel like I should be pushing my stomach out forcefully or something like that. Am I right on that? Is there sort of an in-between here? I'm kind of curious on your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think it is a misnomer because it's gentle. It's not a force.
Right.
Pushing the abdomen out and pushing it back in. And one of the things I do want to just mention is people get so caught up in, am I doing this right? Am I supposed to have thoughts, or is my mind supposed to be clear? Am I doing my abdomen expansion, contraction the right way? And I would say all of that is less important than the consistency of you doing 15 minutes twice a day, almost like it's calf lifts, and 2,
100%.
enjoying
But it's just, again, it's just like any other exercise, right? It's like show up every day. That's the number one thing. Like if you're going to start a routine, whether it's exercise or playing an instrument, show up and put in the work, right?
And the reps. And
yes.
The other piece is being acutely aware of the types of experiences that are happening to you as you're going through the training process, because this unearths people's latent fears.
Mhm.
So some people will say, I just hate the pacer. I have to close my eyes, which, by the way, is not as good as looking at the pacer, because you're training your prefrontal lobe. As you send more oxygen and blood flow to the prefrontal lobe, you get much more cognitive benefits by keeping your eyes open. But the psychological feeling of not liking the pacer is often related to feeling like something's controlling it. and so there's all of these reactions to the breathing itself that are really important to just stay attuned to in the process, because it's your autonomic nervous system trying to purge pieces that keep you stuck on a day-to-day level. Trying to think of another example. The breathing process and just allowing it, as opposed to trying to make it perfect, is a common theme, because we're all programmed to, in this world, to try harder and be more this, or do something and push ourselves even farther to be successful at this. And the concept of allowing and feeling like someone is enough without any doing is a really popular theme.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting to understand the psychology that surfaces during this process as well. Those pieces, if you can catch them, are much more important than how much your abdomen is moving in and out during this process.
Yeah.
If you go through this process at week 4, you and I should chat again, because
I'll go through it. Yeah.
I would be so curious, and maybe you and I can have a conversation about how this is different. And all of these processes, and Wim Hof has beautiful benefits, but they're different. And
sure.
I'd be so curious to hear kind of your description of the process and the outcomes for you.
No, I'll go through it. I mean, I'm sort of not a biohacker. I'm sort of like a mind hacker type of, like, try all these things. I haven't done it yet. One, I wanted to get through the book, get through your interview, but then I'm also kind of in the midst of another thing that I'm doing right now. And one of the things I'm really big on is don't multitask when you're trying things like this. Like, stick to, right? Because what invariably ends up happening is you sort of half-ass a lot of things. It's like, hey, try a thing, go all in on it, see what the results are, and then move on if you want to. So, but yeah, so I want to be able to devote like kind of 100% of my attention, specifically from a breathwork perspective, to this, when I can get to that. But yes, I will do that for sure and go through it, because I'm really excited. I mean, the thing is, I just think, and I should say, first of all, that like at the Navy SEAL Foundation sort of believes in this so much that we give copies of this to active duty guys as part of a program, and get rave reviews on it. So it's something that, you primarily kind of work with athletes and whatnot, but I think there's such applicability to service members, veterans especially, because that whole idea of trying to shift things to more of a parasympathetic state, I just think is such an enormous component for people, and has far-reaching implications for reducing anxiety, reducing PTSD potentially, like all those things. I just think it can just help in so many ways in that regard, And again, I love the fact that it's self-help. It's like, do the work,
And you can see the change.
Yeah. And so it's qualitative and quantitative, right? So it's like, not only do people feel better, but you've also got data to say, yeah, we know, because we can measure your HRV and see the improvement there, right? It's really cool.
And what I think is kind of fun is also teaching people, especially in the Navy actively, how to put themselves in resonance in 3 or less breaths.
Yeah.
And for them to develop the interoceptive awareness, the body sensations that they know that they're in resonance, but practicing it. And why? Why would you want to, even in one breath, be able to go into resonance? because you can make clearer, faster decisions and perform at your full bandwidth. And that has lots of implications for pivotal moments.
Yeah. Can you just sort of give a brief overview of the rest of the 10 weeks here? So it's, once we sort of get in this, because there's other techniques in there. There's sort of like this heart shifting stuff that you get into, which I think is super valuable as well. Just kind of a wave tops of like the other things that are in there to build on this.
Sure. So the first 4 weeks are about building your baseline and optimizing your baseline, maximizing your HRV, but strengthening that baroreflex so you have more precision and agility just at your baseline level for managing the world. And so week 1, we identify the rate of breathing for you that maximizes those heart rate oscillations. And then we move on each week with a theme. And week 2, we focus on adding the abdomen in your breathing. Week 3, we start to teach you themes. And the theme in week 3 is breathing away stress, learning to decelerate your heart rate on demand. And it's a week where you can walk around if you have a heart rate monitor and you can say, oh, my heart rate's 77. I'm going to see if I can bring it down 3 to 5 beats in a few breaths, breathing at my resonant frequency. And you start to see that you're able to let go of stressful moments by decelerating your heart rate. It's a different way of letting go than most people think conceptually about letting go, but it works.
Mm-hmm.
And then we move on in weeks 4 and 5 towards the heart shift. And specifically in week 5, I teach you a rhythm. It's 15 cumulative breaths. The heart, Chris, doesn't speak languages. It doesn't speak Spanish or French or Yiddish or Greek. It speaks rhythms. And you can teach your heart how you want to perform in certain situations with repetition. Your heart is a muscle and it remembers. And so I take you through a process to do just that. And the heart shift in week 5, I use to identify themes that are specific to you. I call them ghost imprints. Everybody has them. Things in their life that have been imprinted on their nervous system and stick there to protect them. But hey, wait, this is something I learned when I was 13 years old. I don't need it anymore, and it's still happening. And you can train your heart to change that pattern. And so the first 5 are about feeling the stressor and letting it go. The second 5, focusing on the inhale and exhale. And the third 5 breaths are teaching the heart your desired state. So I had someone who had panic of losing control on a flight and flight phobia. Mm-hmm. And 18 years of flight phobia, of panic attacks, boarding a flight, getting on a flight. We eliminated it completely. She swears by the heart shift. I've gotten people to the Olympics and the masters on the PGA Tour doing heart shifts the night before to put them in that state where their heart could be open and agile for the performance moment that they were desiring. But essentially, I mentioned it in my book, but it's 5, 5, and 5. The first 5 is feeling the stressor, letting it go. The second 5, inhale and exhale. And the third 5 is the desired state. So for the woman with flight phobia, it was feeling calm and confident in her body and letting go of fear. But she practiced that for many weeks for the heart to embed that as its new muscle pattern. And she would also use it the morning of, and she said it worked beautifully. So I encourage people to try it. It's a new way of thinking about how to fine-tune your psychology.
Yeah.
You can shift your physiology to fine-tune your psychology and in effective ways.
Yeah.
I teach something else that I call heart boosting. It's for in the moment. Let's say you're talking to somebody and they're talking at you, or they say something that unnerves you, and you notice a slight jump in your heart rate. You're getting a little racy inside, And with that somatic awareness, you say, okay, I want to bring my body back to that baseline state where I'm open and intuitive and receptive and able to communicate to the person in front of me effectively. How do I do that? And it's not mental. It's physiological. And with identifying heart imprints in advance, moments in our lives that we've had that desired experience, or an experience that puts us in a state of flow. Interestingly enough, some of the top leaders from all over, different facets of the world that I've worked with, and these are recognizable leaders, will have imprints like holding their child for the first time, and the abundance of love and that proliferation of love that just moved their heart. And we see how it moves their heart with the biofeedback equipment in real time. And then we use that as an imprint to add to their breathing, that connection they felt to their child the first time they held them on the inhale. It's not here, it's here.
Yeah.
And creating that experience and letting go of what's happening in the moment, and doing that for a few breaths to recalibrate. Yep. So there are these different systems that I teach you to shift your physiology, to shift your psychology, to optimize you in real time.
Yeah. Love it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we got a couple minutes. You want to talk kids sports real quick?
Let's talk kids sports.
You just go when you got to go. Yeah, because actually I think it's relevant here too a little bit, right? Like, do you work with kids at all? Is there sort of an age where a kid can do this kind of thing? I mean, obviously, like a little kid isn't going to sit there and do resonance breathing for 15 minutes, but
I think this is such an important topic for the world. And I don't see kids. I have someone else.
Okay.
Team who does work with some elite youth athletes, but I will tell you a little bit about my own girls and their love of resonant breathing, which they've developed their authentic names for: flower breathing, heart,
love it,
heart breath.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting, Chris, and I'll be so curious about your three, but we stumbled upon, I was wearing a Fitbit one day, and my 5-year-old saw the numbers, and she used the numbers. She used the numbers, the step count, and she said, "Mom, this is great. I can control the numbers with my steps." So then I turned it to the heart rate, and I said, "Now see if you can use your flower breathing to bring those numbers down with your breath." She loved it, and what I found was that children, every child internationally has moments of anxiety where they don't feel in control, and it's normal and it's healthy, but they want some way to address it and get themselves out of their state. Mm-hmm. But at 5 or 6 or 8 years old, they don't have the skills to do it. When you add a number that they can control, that turns off the same part of the brain that has anxiety. So for her, having the numbers, seeing that she can control her heart rate, puts a 5-year-old in the driver's seat.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Incredible. And she doesn't go through 15 minutes of breathing a day, but she uses her flower breathing or her resonance breath during moments she wants to change her state, and she can see it and she feels confident about it. So that's where we're at. And we're starting ice skating, their new passion. They have an incredible coach, and
that's important.
Private lessons, and the little one has big dreams of where she's going to go, all on her own. Yeah. But I'm excited to hear about your experience as well, and if you impart any of these kind of skills with your own tribe.
Well, I haven't done, just the what you were specifically talking about there, the breathing, but the idea that, I mean, the idea of empowerment, of the fact that you aren't helpless. And I think it's important for kids. I think it's important for adults. It's important for veterans. Just, you're not helpless with these things. Like, you can impact your mentality, your mindset, your nervous system, your heart rate variability to like improve these things. It takes some work, and it's not easy necessarily, but it's also not, right? It's simple, but it's not easy. But I think that's such an important message, because I think there's far too much messaging these days that is essentially the opposite. That is just, you're a victim of whatever it may be, and you're helpless, and you need somebody to fix you or treat you. And all of that can be good, right? Like, we need other people, certainly, but just this idea of like, hey, you know what? There are things you can do to improve that aspect of whatever you're experiencing right now. And I just think that that's super important, and the figure skating thing is really interesting, because I was talking yesterday actually with a different guest about sort of team sports and how I think that that's a super important thing for kids. Like, you just learn, you're probably not going to be a professional athlete, but what you learn about failure and success and camaraderie and how to lead and how to follow, like, there's such important life skills there. And even in figure skating, where for the most part you're out there by yourself, there's still, like, they work together as a group and they do these things that are really important. But then they also have this other pressure of that performance by yourself out there. And we've all seen it. Every figure skater falls their very first jump. And it's like, what do you do next? Right? Do you pick yourself up and keep going? The person at the Olympics who, like, they worked their whole life for that, and the very first jump they fall. And it's like, you got to get up and finish the routine. And that's such an important skill to learn, and I love that about watching my kids, because one, they can do things on skates that I will never be able to do. Like, I have no background in it whatsoever, but it's the mentality aspect of it, right? The pressure of that, how you deal with that, how you deal with failure and frustration is just, it's great. I think these things are so important for kids. So thank you so much. It was so awesome to meet you. I wish we could talk for another 2 hours on this stuff.
And if you go through my book and at week 4 want to check in and do a little chat, I would love it.
Yes, I will. So the book is Heart, Breath, Mind, Dr. Leah Lagos, Conquer Stress, Build Resilience, and Perform at Your Peak. It's awesome. Check it out. It doesn't matter who you are. Certainly if you are an athlete or a veteran or whatever it may be, I think it's invaluable stuff. And I can't wait to dig in personally and do it myself. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Chris.
Take care. Bye. Thanks for listening to On the X, an Ironclad original, presented by the Navy SEAL Foundation. For more information about the work of the foundation and to learn how you can get involved, please visit NavySealFoundation.org.